This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. You can subscribe to The Piano Maven through my Substack page, and I've provided a link in the episode description. Paid subscribers will get free recordings at the beginning of each month, and I hope to resume Zoom meetings for subscribers very soon. It's just been a very busy spring with concert commitments and traveling, but I'm so grateful for your support to help keep this podcast alive and afloat. Let's talk about what was once called the longest piece of continuous, non-repetitive piano music ever published, which is the Opus Clavicembalisticum by Sorabji Sorabji. His name is quite a mouthful. By the way, his real name was Leon Dudley, but if you're going to write 4 or 5 hours worth of dense, exotic-sounding music on multiple staves, you're going to need an exotic pen name, and Leon Dudley is just not going to cut it. But if you go by the name of Sorabji, you're bound to get a cult following. Sorabji was famous, or rather infamous, for composing the longest, the densest, and most elaborately difficult piano pieces on planet Earth. And most of these big pieces have long passacaglias and fugues built into them. And in the past 20 years or so, we've seen a veritable cottage industry of Sorabji on disc. More pianists are discovering these long pieces and recording them. But Opus Clavicembalisticum, which hereafter I will call OC, has the biggest legend attached to it. Sorabji gave the premiere himself not long after he composed it. It was finished in 1930. Now, we have no clue what the performance really sounded like, but in 1940, Sorabji issued a ban on having any of his music performed in public. And that ban lasted until 1976, when several pianists petitioned Sorabji for permission to perform some of his works. And Sorabji was pleased enough by these pianists to grant his permission and to break the ban, so to speak. And the pianists in question were Jonty Solomon and Michael Haberman. Or do I say Haberman? I think it's Michael Haberman. And Sorabji also granted Jeffrey Douglas Madge permission to undertake playing OC complete in public for the very first time since Sorabji's own premiere. And, in fact, Madge gave the modern premiere in 1982 in Utrecht. And that performance actually was issued on LP. Madge played OC again in Chicago in 1983, and that live performance was issued on the Beast label many years later. And then in 1985 and 1986, John Ogden undertook a studio recording of OC for the Altaris label. And then I remember back in 2008 when I met my friend and colleague Daan Vandewalle in New York. And he wanted to get a record company interested in this project, and I tried to help him with that, but then it kind of fizzled out. Daan gave his first performance of OC back in 2004. And finally, in 2023, he achieved his long-held desire to record OC under studio conditions. And he did have fabulous conditions. He had great acoustics, he had a great recording team, and a superbly regulated concert grand piano. And there is no question that Daan Vandewalle's recording is the most technically accurate, musically consistent, and best engineered edition of OC available. Generally, his tempos are slower than those of Madge or Ogden, but his slower pacing allows for a higher level of scrutiny in regard to details in terms of dynamics and textural organization. And when the music gets really, really thick, the pacing does not allow any of the momentum to bog down. There's a real steadiness and cumulative force at play here. The theme and 49 variations that open part 2 of OC might be the heart and soul of this mammoth work. And I think that this is where Vandewalle's expressive and coloristic resources really come into play. He intones the theme's legatissimo, slow-moving chords, almost as if the piano's hammers were organ stops. And he vividly characterizes each variation by means of timbre and touch. And pretty much throughout this section, and indeed throughout the entire piece, Daan Vandewalle generates momentum and tension and release by his careful attention to the dynamics, and also by not getting too loud too soon, which can very easily happen in live performances. Now, John Ogden plays the first cadenza ridiculously fast, and by doing so, he makes total hash out of the melodic cogency and the clearly formed chordal climaxes that one readily hears in Daan Vandewalle's much slower rendition. In the cadenza number 2 in part 3, Vandewalle builds the music from the bottom up in a massive, emphatic manner that's quite different from the crisper and drier approach in Madge's 1983 performance. And it's only in this movement where I slightly prefer what Madge does. But to compare Madge and Vandewalle in the Fuga number 4, the quadruplex fugue, especially in the subject's big exposition, it's kind of like experiencing both night and day in the same city. Madge, for example, is altogether brisker and more détaché, but then Daan Vandewalle's phrasing is more inflected and songful. But then again, the really elaborate episodes in this fugue benefit from Vandewalle's real astute linear awareness and his flexibility when it comes to moments of transition. And since one can really conserve energy under studio conditions, I don't think it's any surprise how Vandewalle shapes Sorabji's reams of notes into sweeping cumulative paragraphs that somehow leave at least one listener, like myself, more exhilarated than exhausted. So while Jeffrey Douglas Madge and John Ogden still have quite a lot to offer in their respective OC recordings, I don't think there's any question that Daan Vandewalle raises the proverbial bar, so to speak, and basically sets a reference standard for this pianistic Mount Everest. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings, and I look forward to being with you next time.